Hey everyone, this is Chris. Welcome back to the channel. So, some of a general chat with you about Japan is an extremely complicated topic. I'll try my best to share some thoughts with you. One of the things is that Japan was one of my specialties in college. Also, when I was a kid, I grew up with Robotech Macross. I played Nintendo. I'm sure many of you had Pokemon cards. I was even more crazy. I was reading the manga. I watched TV shows. And in fact, I really like Densha Toko. If you guys know what that is, please write in the comments below. It's a great Japanese TV show. But point being, I really like Japan. It's interesting because even though I always wanted to live there, their policy, meaning the government, wasn't really conducive to immigration. So essentially, if you're a worker and you want to go to Japan, you can only be there for about 5 years. You can't bring your family, and they basically just want you to leave the country. So they're not encouraging of immigration, and this is really important. Because Japan is facing a lot of problems. Their economy is basically flat. It'll grow negative or it'll grow just a little bit, but essentially flat. It's been like that for many years. They refer to this as the lost decades. In fact, they were in a bubble economy like in the 80s through the early 90s. And, in the USA, we had a lot of like movies and things of this nature of like worried about, Japan buying up the USA. That didn't happen. But back then it was a real thing. I know I laugh out now, but, for those who are young enough, you would remember this sort of fear, but it just didn't happen. And, but Japan has been declined ever since. They also have an aging population, meaning the average age keeps getting older. Effectively, the Japanese people live for a long time, longest in the world. Also, Korea has a long lifespan as well. And I mention that because I'm in Korea. But they're not have a they don't have a birth rate that replaces the older workers, right? So their population is actually shrinking, right? So shrinking economy, shrinking population, and so like what do? You want to encourage growth. So in USA you might set interest rates at zero. In fact, Japan is like, you know what? Zero is not good enough. We're going to go negative interest rates. So they started doing that in 2016, which seems like a really bizarre policy. But the basic gist of it is that banks are, effectively charged a fee if they hold money. So they're encouraged to be lending out money, right? Get the economy going. Or you could say if you're a regular Japanese person, there's not really much incentive to hold your money in the bank. So they want you to spend, but yet Japanese people are like, you know what? I'm not necessarily going to spend. I'm just going to hold a bunch of cash. And on top of that, there's really expensive to have kids, right? So people aren't really having kids, and then the government's like trying to encourage people to have more children, which isn't really that easy to do. One said policy would be like essentially limit overtime. So like tell companies you can't, work your workers past say 8 hours and go home and go have kids kind of thing, and people still don't do it. How do you encourage people to say get married and have families, right? Young people in Japan, they stay single much, much longer. Some never get married. Effectively, the economy is just in a shambles, and same with the culture of these kind of things, right? And the other issue, which I mentioned with, say, immigration, where, they're not bringing in new talent, say, from other countries. You also have the central situation in Japan as well, as where women aren't necessarily encouraged to start companies and bring innovation. It's still a male dominated society. And so you have multiple issues going on, and you also have your neighbors are on the rise. So China and Korea in particular, right, have been growing, and Japan has been in decline. And so what are you going to do if you're Japan? One of the things is you could try to encourage more investment into local Japanese economy. And so there has been some talk when effectively the change in the Bank of Japan's policy might encourage more Japanese investors to sell off their equities in other countries. So be it UK, be it the US, be even in a place like Vietnam. So for example, when we were in Saigon, the subway and the train system was being built by Japan. But here's a big but. For whatever reason, the Vietnamese government wasn't paying Japan for the work that they were doing. So I guess I think I want to say it was Mitsubishi. Don't quote me on that one, but it was one of the companies. I think they lost a bunch of money on that because essentially they weren't paid for said thing. But from the Japanese person's perspective, you could talk about SoftBank as well. They're investing in, say, like for example, SoftBank invested in like an Alibaba in China because there wasn't much opportunity to invest in Japan, right? Again, low birth rates, the economies aren't growing, et cetera, and you start investing in other countries. But when you do that, you have the risk to say a place like a Vietnam or a place like a China to where there's government corruption. So they've lost money on those things as well. It is a tough fix, and I don't know if there's anything they can do if they stay on their current path, other than mess around with interest rates. Because, like I mentioned, I think the immigration policy probably needed to change in Japan. also to, try to open it up more to women. Also, too, just take a look how Japan compares to its neighbors. Just want to show you guys this chart to illustrate the problem that they're facing. India, this is sort of GDP projections. India 7.3, Philippines 6.7, Indonesia 5.1, China 4.7, Australia 4.1, South Korea 2.5, and then you have Japan at 1.9. The only one that's lower than Japan is 1.1 on this list. And this list does not include Vietnam, which I think would be closer to like an India or Philippines in terms of growth. It's just not that attractive a place for people to invest. However, here's a big however, Japan is relatively stable. They're a modern, mature country, and they also have a modern economy. So I say relatively mature. So the question is, like, how do you solve the problem in Japan? Shrinking population, economy that's not growing, and also to your competitors are on the rise. If you have the answer, please let me know. And also, too, please let the Japanese government know. They're desperately seeking answers. So just wanted to share some thoughts about Japan and sort of what's going on. And I do appreciate your time, and I'll catch you next video.